From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, September 26, 2025. Anthony Albanese's push for a seat on the United Nations Security Council will likely involve Australian taxpayers spending hundreds of millions of dollars in new aid to Africa. It'll also put the PM at odds with Donald Trump, who's still seething about a broken elevator and a dodgy teleprompter that marred the US President's speech to the UN General Assembly this week. Australia last held a temporary Security Council seat in 2013 and 2014, and now Albanese wants the gig back in 2029-30. The future of one of our biggest natural gas projects is in doubt, thanks to environmental conditions imposed by Environment Minister Murray Watt. North West Shelf project operator Woodside has already shut down one of the nation's oldest liquefied natural gas plants. And analysts say the government's big emissions reductions targets mean a new gas field off WA may never get going. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. Saturday's AFL Grand Final has everything: a homophobia crisis, an ageing rapper, board backstabbing, and even some footy. High above the MCG on Saturday, Australia's most powerful people will gather to eat party pies and do some deals. Our business reporter John Stensholt will be there, and today he's here to take us inside the party of the year. John Stensholt is the Australian's senior business reporter, and he'll be heading to the AFL Grand Final this year. But John, you're going to have to work, aren't you?
Unfortunately, despite having one of the hottest tickets in town, there's a price to pay, and I do have to chronicle who's who in one of the best rooms, I think, in corporate, sporting and political Australia for the year, really.
Yeah, the Olympic room at the MCG. Take me inside. What is that and who's in there?
Well, it's usually 600 to 700 people, and they're crammed in. There's tables everywhere. There's billionaires, there's CEOs, there's media industry people, there's all the AFL heavy hitters, obviously. There's a smattering of ex-players and legendary coaches as well. Look, I think it's the best room in town. So forget about the horse racing. Tennis Australian Open does really well too every January, but that's usually people are in their shorts and shirts. This one is a suit and tie, best seats in town. From the Prime Minister usually down, I'm not sure if Alba will be back for this one this time. It's usually Prime Minister down, billionaires like Kerry Stokes. It really is the creme de la creme of, most powerful people in Australia.
I often wonder in these corporate suites whether they're paying attention to the sport or not. In that room, do they actually focus once the footy starts?
Well, I think if you take someone like Richard Marles, who's our Deputy Prime Minister, he is a Geelong tragic. He will be focusing on the game, definitely. The rest of them, well, it really depends on how close it is. So I've been to grand finals before where, there's been floggings at half time, and all of a sudden you'll see that the seats outside the room, so you walk out a door and then you actually have a seat on the middle level, which is one of the best seats ever, right? So, if the game's not close, they'll be back inside the room, having a drink and doing a lot of networking. So that's a good judge. If you can see it on the TV and there's a smattering of empty seats, it means all the powers that be are back inside, probably having some party pies while, doing some networking and talking deals and so on.
Yeah, I was going to say, are deals being done, or is it a bit gauche to actually talk about business and money at this social event?
Look, I think once you see the people with their scarves, for either team, which usually you can tell, because if they're brand new scarves, that's the first time these politicians or business people have been to a game probably. But yeah, it's a place to be seen at the start of the game perhaps, and after that you're talking a lot of business.
What's the most telling conversation or encounter you've seen happening in the Olympic room?
Look, I always remember the people, like Dan Andrews, when he was the Victorian Premier, huddling with the Prime Minister of the day, or someone like a Kerry Stokes, was maybe talking a bit of TV deals. In fact, Kerry I spoke to last year, and I asked him, could Channel 7 telecast the game nationally and exclusively? I said, who's going to win today? And he smiled and said, me. So that gives you an indication of how powerful these people think they are as well. But yeah, you'll always see politicians huddling. The Prime Minister's there or a Premier. There'll be people, attracted to them pretty quickly.
Two of the best teams we've seen in a long time, and we are underway. He looks on. He's feeling it, Jezza. That's his first goal in the big time. Can you believe it?
Now, you're a Melburnian, and I know you are actually one of the people who's going to be watching the football. It's Geelong versus Brisbane. For those of us who don't follow AFL as closely, tell me what to expect from this game and what's at stake for these two teams.
Look, Brisbane are the defending premiers, but Geelong, I think, are the hot favourites. Geelong have had a fantastic year. They're a powerhouse. They just keep on keeping on. They're extremely good at recruiting players to, maybe leave Melbourne or, leave other, capital cities and maybe enjoy the quiet life down the surf coast of Victoria. A bit of a surf, bit of footy. They beat Brisbane a couple of weeks ago in the first week of the finals. They beat them really well. They've had an excellent year. The Patrick Dangerfields and the Bailey Smiths of the world are superstars. So, look, the Lions, I think, will be valiant, but you would expect Geelong to win. But I'm always wrong on these things, Claire.
Well, I hope you're not going to be putting any money on it then.
Definitely not.
Coming up, meanwhile, the AFL itself is in leadership turmoil, and it's chosen a very controversial act for the halftime entertainment. What's going wrong in this beloved code? Okay, now just stepping back inside that Olympic room for a moment, the AFL itself has become one of the most dramatic organisations. It's tipped over from the sports pages to the business pages of our newspaper, The Australian. What is going on right at the top of the AFL, and why is there a big drama unfolding there?
The AFL is the biggest code in the country on the field, off the field, definitely money-wise. But otherwise, the boardroom's in a bit of disarray, actually, Claire. So the chairman, Richard Goyder, who was such a huge name in Australian business for so many years, now perhaps that reputation was tarnished because he was the Qantas chairman. Qantas had big issues when he was there. He's hung on as the AFL chair role, and now the clubs want him out. And he's actually said he's going to leave. But now it becomes this big game of who takes over from him. And there's all these machinations and manoeuvring going on in the background and literally behind closed doors and involving a lot of big Melbourne names as to who is next in line for the best role in Australian boardroom sport, I think. So Goyder wants, certain people in charge after him, some sort of a legacy play. He's put up Peter Gordon, who's a famous lawyer and also, an ex-AFL club chairman. He's put up Craig Drummond as well, the Transurban chairman. He used to run Medibank Private. He's opposed Jeff Brown, former Channel 9 and AFL lawyer, Channel 9 boss and AFL lawyer for so many years. There's a couple of other names in there as well. Eddie Maguire's swirled around. Gil McLaughlin, all these names. Peter Allen, who's like the Coles chairman, is also involved too. It's a very Melbourne thing. The nexus with, between business, politics and sport is so close here in this town. And no one knows what's going to happen next.
What's going wrong? Why is there dissatisfaction with Richard Goyder?
Look, I mean, it's a case of probably staying too long. He's been on the commission for, more than 15 years. It's about 17 years. By the time his term would be up, he'd stay the whole way. There's a bit of a thought that the AFL has sort of lost its way a bit in terms of leadership. Andrew Dillon, the CEO, is very well regarded, but he's a quiet character. He's not the big gregarious guy that his predecessors, Andrew Demetrio and Gillon McLaughlin, were. So there's a thought that perhaps the AFL has, been a bit weak on things, whether it's been on-field issues, with some racism or sexism stuff. There's been, perhaps the clubs have been given too much leeway or they haven't cracked down on things soon enough. There's been a whole bunch of social issues that have cost taken a bit of bark off the code, I think. So they think that there's a bit of a leadership vacuum. They've had enough of Richard and, they want someone else in there. But no one knows who's going to come in next.
The AFL does have a CEO whose job is supposed to be running the code day to day. It's always interesting in organisations who really has the power. Is it the CEO or is it the chair? What's the case in the AFL?
It's certainly been very much with the CEO previously, with Gillon and Andrew, the last couple of CEOs, because they were such big names. Andrew Dillon, who's there now, is probably a bit more of a quiet character. He's more a sort of, power sharer or a bit more sort of conciliatory with people. Look, I think he's certainly, decent at his job, but he's just not seen that way publicly. So I think Richard Goyder has much more of an influence behind the scenes than he might have had previously. It really depends on what style of chairman comes in next as to what happens from there. Someone like a Peter Gordon, we suspect, will be pretty hands-on. Someone like a Jeff Brown will probably be, pretty strong in the leadership sort of way, but not for very long. He's withdrawn from the process anyway. Craig Drummond, probably, more of the same. And the jury's out on any other names that we talk about.
Notwithstanding the occasional drama about racism, the AFL has, pretty strong credentials as a progressive organisation. It has pushed that hard. It's had a pride round for many years. It talks a lot about reconciliation. But it got itself into a bit of hot water with the choice of Snoop Dogg, the American rapper, for the entertainment at the grand final.
Well, the homophobic saga embroiling the AFL is deepening this morning with fresh calls to cancel Snoop Dogg from performing at next month's grand final. The outrage follows comments made by the controversial rapper criticising the portrayal of a same-sex couple in a children's movie.
The rapper explaining his shock at seeing lesbian parents depicted on screen. The scene from the 2022 film marked Disney's first same-sex kiss.
Well, my grandson in the middle of the movie like, Papa Snoop, how she have a baby with a woman? She a woman. Oh, I didn't come in for this shit. I just came to watch the goddamn movie.
I don't know if you're a Snoop Dogg superfan, John, but what do you think about that choice?
Oh, look, no, I'm certainly not really familiar with Snoop's songs over the years, but I will say this. Look, Snoop's probably more mainstream than you think these days. He was on the Olympics coverage on US television. He's on shows over there. Look, maybe it's a bit sort of, not quite right for Australian tastes. The AFL's always been very conservative in terms of who it chooses for its AFL grand final entertainment. And maybe they're just trying to be a little bit edgier here. We're not actually sure it's as edgy as people think.
Yeah, well, he is 53.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, that probably chimes in with, the usual age category of people that the AFL are trying to appeal to.
John Stensholt is the editor of The List, Australia's richest 250, and a senior business reporter. You can check out all our coverage of the footy, plus John's goss from inside the Olympic room, along with margin call editor Yoni Bashan at theaustralian.com.au.